Okay, right. Keep your comments coming in. We'll read them in before the end of the show. But there's a very, very important game, arguably more important than the two semi-finals, between Westmeath and Laois. That's at Semple Stadium on, is it Saturday at 2 p.m. or is it Sunday? But that's a big one because the loser goes down to Division 2A for next year. Joe Fortune over the Westmeath team, it hasn't been a great season for them so far. They're on a minus 78 scoring difference, albeit on the tougher side of the league. Laois, they've found it the going very tough also, minus 63 scoring difference after their 5 defeats. But there's a lot at stake here when William Maher meets Joe Fortune.
Yeah, listen, if you're a manager of either of these teams, you're probably realistically, and I know they probably, Joe Fortune would admit it anyway, that if you wanted to have your team primed for 2 games this year in particular, it would have been this game that they both realistically knew was coming down the tracks, and it would probably be, for Westmeath anyway, it would be the Antrim game in Leinster, and for Laois, it would be, it would probably be the Offaly game and maybe the Kerry game and the Joe McDonagh, and probably the Kildare game now at this stage, the whole campaign. But it's based on form and what we've seen so far. I would say Westmeath have been maybe more competitive in a tougher division, and Laois have suffered that. It was basically a relegation semi-final against Antrim. They were beaten by 6 points that day.
And they started well.
Well. They generally haven't stringed together. They've played a couple of decent halves. They were okay against Tip in the second half. They were good against Waterford in the first half when they had an extra man, but they haven't been able to string more than 40, 45 minutes together realistically. And Westmeath obviously gave them that bit of a hiding in last year's Leinster relegation game as well. I think they hit them for 5 goals that night after it had been tight enough up until maybe half time or that. So I'd probably be favouring Westmeath here. It like, you know what though, like, it's a huge game for Westmeath in one respect, but like, if they do win, if the league structure is not changed, is there any benefit to, them going back into that Group 1A again next year? I genuinely don't think there is. I honestly think the league structure has to be looked at, particularly for that kind of, for that squeezed kind of sector, which includes probably Kildare, Kerry, Offaly, Laois, Westmeath. Like I just don't think Division 1 is of any good to them really at the moment, and I think something's going to have to be changed to make it maybe more beneficial for those teams.
Yeah, I'm just looking at Westmeath's performance. If you take out that heavy defeat to Clare the first day out and the last day out against Galway with 427 to 112, so both of those were fairly heavy paced since they conceded 427 both days. Yeah, they were pretty good against Wexford in relative terms. They were okay. They did well against the West Cork team that was much changed, and did okay against Limerick. Killian Doyle, he's done a lot of the scoring. Niall O'Brien, he's been pitching in okay as well. Kieran Doyle as well. For Laois, Picky Maher has scored the most by a country mile, but he has just 4 points from play. Like, he has 36 points, but just 4 from play. Ryan Mullaney, remember, went up to score 2 goals against Watford that day. He's got 4 points from play. Otherwise, Aaron Dunphy has won 7, Tomas Keys 8, James Keys 7. They're all going to need to be pitching in big time here. And like, I see some of the comments coming in here. First off, is Offaly Kerry on also this weekend? It is. We'll come to that shortly. Pegleg Lonergan says, a lot of the scores conceded against Galway, this is for Westmeath, came in the last 10 minutes. Westmeath will have too much for Laois. Down the years, Laois always have poor morale. They drop their heads very quickly. But a couple of years ago, Laois were up against Antrim in that relegation playoff coming out, to go down to the Joe McDonagh. And they did produce at Parnell Park. So they don't always drop the heads, but they'll need a massive performance here.
Yeah, even in Eddie's second year, weren't they hammered by Dublin up in that Leinster quarter final and bounced back, and was it Waterford they should have beaten in the qualifiers that year? So they have bounced back, but yeah, all signs would suggest that they're struggling at the moment. Ross King has probably had limited enough kind of game time too. One of their, what would be expected to be maybe one of their marquee forwards. Willie Dunphy again has had interrupted preparation. Aaron Dunphy hit 1-4 in one of the games. Can't remember which one exactly. And they need the likes of him. Like, the form he was in 2019 was outstanding, and he just has probably struggled to get back to that form with injuries and various other bits and pieces. But I'd be stumping for Westmeath in this one. And I think with Derek McNicholas back involved as well, I just think, yeah, even though they've been beaten in all their games so far, and the first and the last were quite resounding, the three in the middle were, competitive enough for long stages. And just as what one of our viewers said there, you'd be expecting down the stretch, if it's tight, that Westmeath would be the ones potentially to pull away.